Okay. Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to the Cambridge City Council's Planning and Transport Scrutiny Committee meeting. These include members here, those attending virtually, and those members of the public who are watching the live stream via the Council's YouTube channel. My name is Councillor Antoinette Nestor, and I'm the chair of this committee meeting. Please can those present in the room note that everything on your desk, including your laptop screen, could be broadcast at some point, as cameras within the room follow the microphone being switched on. If you're following the Teams meeting here in the room or your laptop, your audio, microphone, and camera must be switched off. If the fire alarm sounds, please follow officers who will leave the room and exit the building via the Peace Hill staircase and exit. Do not use the lift. I will now roll call councillors alphabetically by surname so the public can see who they are. Please advise if you know of any apologies from other councillors when I ask you to speak, please say so. Are you present, Councillor Bagent?
I am, Chair.
Councillor Bennett?
Thank you, Chair. I am here.
Okay, and I understand you're attending for Councillor Tong.
Yes, indeed. I am
Thank you.
Councillor Tong's alternate.
Councillor Porrer?
Present, Chair.
Councillor Pounds?
Present, Chair.
Councillor Swift?
Present, Chair.
And Councillor Lee?
Present, I'm here for Timbick, Councillor Timbick.
That's correct. And I believe Councillor Dipkovic is running late. Thank you. Now, the Executive Councillor for Planning, Building Control and Infrastructure, Councillor Thornbury, is also present. Welcome to you.
Thank you, Chair.
The senior officer present for this meeting is Stephen Kelly, Joint Director of Planning and Economic Development.
Good evening, everyone.
We're also joined virtually by Caroline Hunt, a Strategic Planning Manager, and Chenjet Taruvinga, Principal Planner, and Claire Shannon, Senior Planner. Welcome you all. Now, Committee Manager Claire Toncliffe and Meeting Producer Boris Herzog are also present. Other officers will be joining us throughout the meeting. Now, just for those who do not know the procedure, the committee will receive a presentation from the relevant report author. Members will then discuss the report and vote on the recommendations. As chair, if the vote is split, I will have the casting vote. Following the vote of the committee, the executive councillor will be asked if they agree the decision. So we'll now proceed to agenda item 1.
Declarations of interest, please, Chair. I'd like to declare that I'm a Cambridge resident, I'm a member of the Green Party, and I'm a member of the Save Honey Hill Community Choir.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Bagent?
I'm a member of Cambridge Cycling Campaign. I'm a Labour Party member for Romsey, and I'd love to be in a choir, but I can't sing.
Thank you, Councillor Bagent. Any other declarations? Yes, Councillor Porrer?
I'm not sure if it's entirely relevant. I do have a cousin who works for Anglia Water, but I've had no discussions with them. My discretion is unfettered.
Thank you, Councillor Porrer. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Anybody else? No? Okay. All right, so we'll follow on to agenda item 1. And apologies have been covered in the introduction. Have I missed any? No? All right. So agenda item 1. So then we're going to agenda item 2. Please could committee members declare if you have already any declarations. I think you already have done so. And now, okay, so we have all of that, so let's see that. Now, agenda item 3, which are the minutes of the 28th of September, 2023. Yes, Councillor Pons.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered if there were any updates yet on the neighbourhood plans and the design. I know there was going to be a trial in King's Hedges. I just wondered if there was anything that's come forward since we had that meeting. Otherwise, I'm happy, obviously, to wait till the next meeting.
Okay. Would any of the officers like to reply?
I'm not aware of any further developments since the 28th of September in respect of neighbourhood planning. We have, I think we've obviously got the South Newnham neighbourhood plan in progress, but I'm not aware of any specific changes to that programme or process at the moment.
Thank you. What I was particularly interested in was the fact that what we didn't get information at last meeting was how people would apply to be a leading group, as it were, for any of the neighbourhood plans or design plans. And I was hoping that I've got some residents who are quite interested to do it, but we need a bit more information.
Just if what I can do, Councillor, is the Shared Planning Service have actually produced a guide on neighbourhood planning, and if it's helpful, what I'll do is I'll make sure that you get a link to that guidance online that you could then pass on to those interested residents.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Pound and Officer Kelly. Now, as the minutes of 28th of September 2023 have been submitted to this meeting for approval. If there are any concerns, please could members raise them now, otherwise they will both be approved as a correct record. Issues? No? All right, so that's okay. Now, agenda item 4, public questions. There were no public questions received for this meeting, so we will move straight forward to item 5. Now, and for those who have the document pack with you, this will be on page 13, which is the agenda item 5. This is the local impact report for the Cambridge Water Treatment Plant relocation, DCO, and associated delegation arrangements to the joint director. I believe then that the Joint Director of Planning and Economic Development, Stephen Kelly, will introduce the report before handing over to the principal planner. Stephen, let's begin. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, just a couple of comments to introduce this item. It's clearly a very substantial report, and what we've tried to do, or what Chenge will try and do, is provide an overview in terms of the rationale that sits behind it. It's a bit of an unusual report in the sense that this council will be used to be as the planning authority, forming a planning balance and a conclusion on the merits of a proposal as the determining authority. In this case, the legislation, I think it's set out on page 25 of the your agendas, but referred to section 65 of the 2008 Act. We're being asked to provide a commentary in respect of the impacts of the development, and those are both positive and negative impacts. Our job is not necessarily to determine to go the full extent of the journey of determining a planning application, or indeed commenting as if we're determining a planning application. The other point that, and Chenge will try and give a summary of those impacts that we've identified in the report itself. The other point that I think it's really important to stress is that the City Council is a statutory consultee in this process. Now, the specifics of this project also place the City Council as a partner with the applicant in the benefits of the relocation project, which the Development Consent Order proposal relates to. So an indirect partner of Anglian Water in the realisation of opportunities at North East Cambridge, which is clearly an outcome from a successful order. It's important for me to stress that this response is on behalf of the City Council as a consultee in accordance with the Act. And for good reason, it's not, it is in no way related to the Council's interests, and indeed has a separate lead member and a separate committee for considering those interests before it. And in that way, it is appropriate and absolutely right and proper that this council, as consultee under the Act is able to provide a response. And in some respects, I just want to reassure both members and the community at large that those are very separate functions, and that the shared planning service on your behalf has approached the assessment of the impacts independently from any other part of the council's process as partner in that strategy. So with that, and just as I said, it's an extensive report, drawing your eye to page 25, which points to the purpose of the LIR, which I've summarised, and paragraph 3.7 in the parent report, which points to some of the benefits. You'll see that in the recommendation and in the conclusions, the council, or we are asking you to conclude that in principle, the council is able to support the proposal on the balance of the benefits and impacts. But there are a number of areas in the report in which further clarification is being sought, or indeed, we suspect further dialogue around appropriate controls, clarity and certainty. Through this process, there is also a very substantial engagement with the authority, and the examining authority will ask and expect responses from the parties, including the council, to that examination process to a tight timeline. They have already, in addition to an obligation for us to submit the local impact report, they have already asked a substantial number of questions of the City Council, and that process is expected to continue throughout the examination process, very much in the way that it does through a public inquiry for planning appeals and so forth. And so it's not to silence or exclude either members or the community from that process, but it's a practical implication is that the recommendation in front of you includes a delegation to me on your behalf to respond to those questions as appropriate, having regard to comments and concerns that you may well express through this examination, this discussion, as well as previous comments and so forth that we had as we moved to this point when Planning and Transport Scrutiny Committee originally agreed to a delegation to me around that point. So the second limb of the recommendation that you can see on page 14 and carried into page 15 is in some respects seeking your acknowledgement of the practical implications of trying to run a very significant public inquiry response process on your behalf and seeking your delegation on that matter. With that, Chair, if I can pass to Chenge to clarify the key threads of the impact report in front of you, and then perhaps we can move to questions and comments. Is that okay? Thank you. Chenge.
Thank you, Stephen. Claire, if you could just get the PowerPoint presentation up on the screen. Thank you. Just by way of introduction, we have worked very closely with officers as part of the local impact report process. We have consulted with all our technical expertise within the service on matters that are all set out within the local impact report. And so the response that they have provided us is what has been set out. We will now go through those key areas that they have highlighted, but just in terms of introducing the subject matter, in terms of where the site is that we're discussing, as well as where it is proposed to relocate to, as well as, again, just touching on what the local impact report process is, I'll hand you over to Claire.
Yes, thank you, Chenge. This is just the next slide showing the existing site in red here and the proposed site, which is in South Cambridgeshire. On the right here, again, it's the red line plan, again, showing the existing site, the proposed site, as well as the water beach pipeline. Moving on to, these are just some illustrative indicative drawings, appreciating that they relate to the South Cams, the proposed site, CGI image. And then again, another image showing the site with the A14 on the southwest boundary and the vehicle access coming in from the west as well. Just pass you back on to Chenge to go through the local impact report.
And as Stephen has already set out, again, the purpose of the local impact report is to provide a very clear factual narrative in relation to impacts associated with the development. Each local authority is required as part of the DCO process to provide a local impact report, and that is what we sought to do. We are not going to be, it's not a planning balance, as again Stephen has expressed. So the local impact report that we have written is due to be submitted to the examining authority on the 20th of November, along with other documentation as well. Moving on to the next slide. In terms of the strategic plan context, which is a significant portion of the local impact report that you have before you, the local impact report highlights Cambridge City's long-held ambition to regenerate part of the city within the existing wastewater treatment plant. The interdependence between the DCO process and the development plan process has been narrated throughout the report, and there is clear evidence through the emerging plan-making process of the significant benefits that would be enabled by the relocation of the wastewater treatment site and the extensive area surrounding of underutilized previously developed land where regeneration potential has effectively been stalled. We've also considered health impacts as part of the local impact report. The report recognizes that there are potential areas that need to be improved in the community liaison plan as part of the DCO requirements that will come towards the end of the process. But in terms of the general methodology and assessment that the applicant has done in terms of health impacts, we consider that to be fairly satisfactory. We've also looked at the carbon impact, and the City Council is satisfied with the approach to assessing carbon emissions. This is set out in the carbon chapter of the applicant's environment statement, and mitigation will be controlled through the DCO mechanisms. And we're also looking for further carbon reductions to be achieved through later design stages and on-site construction activities associated with the redevelopment. In terms of traffic, the City Council recognises that Cambridgeshire County Council is the highway authority and would therefore be assessing all matters related to traffic impact. However, the City LIR sets out the decommissioning activities associated with the existing wastewater treatment plant would result in additional daily vehicle movements on Milton Road and Cowley Road. Although the City Council notes that these traffic movements may be neutral or not significant, as set out in the applicant's submission, it's considered that this does need to be considered in the context of other construction activities taking place within this area. And so that's a point that we have put across to our colleagues at County, who we are working very closely with, and they will be assessing traffic impacts as part of their own local impact report, which they too will be submitting to the Secretary of State. I'll hand you over to Claire to cover the other areas that we covered.
Thank you. In terms of land quality, land contamination is briefly discussed in Chapter 14 of the ES. And the City Council considers the contamination and land quality assessment to be acceptable. The City Council also acknowledged that unless excavated as part of the decommissioning works, any contaminated soils would be left in situ with liability passed on to future developers. It's noted that this is standard procedure. In terms of noise and vibration, the City Council is generally satisfied with the scope, methodology and conclusions set out by the applicant. There is a ventilation stack proposed with a chemical dosing element, and as outlined in our LI local impact report, we have asked for further details to be provided on both these. Further operational noise information needs to be provided along with operational noise impact assessment, and this is in the context of the future development. Moving on to odour, the methodology in respect of the odour impact assessment is consistent with local and national policy. The City Council notes that construction and decommissioning activities will be temporary, of relatively short duration, and as such is in agreement with the results of the assessment undertaken and the mitigation measures contained within the Code of Construction Practice. Lastly, on to air quality. The City Council's primary consideration for local air quality is in respect of the vehicle emissions. As detailed in the applicant's documents, there will be vehicle movements around Cowley Road and Milton Road associated with the decommissioning work at the existing site. However, these movements, again, will be temporary. The City Council agrees with the scope methodology used by the applicant in respect of this. Just moving on to other matters. Last month, the preliminary meeting and initial issue-specific hearings took place on the 17th and 18th of October. Future hearings, which will be issue-specific, are expected to take place early January and early March. And just to go through the DCO timeline, we're at the examination phase, which is expected to take 6 months. The start of that was at the issue-specific hearings last month, so expected to go on until April 2024. Following this, the inspector's decision will take 3 months, bringing us to July 24, and then the Secretary of State decision will take another 3 months maximum, bring us to October next year. And then, of course, we take into consideration the 6-week judicial review window. That's all from us. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Claire and Caroline and Chenge. And then before we proceed to question, do you have anything else to add? Or Stephen, do you have anything else to add?
I don't think so, no, other than to say, obviously, we're reciting the kind of City Council's position that we're recommending to you. You haven't made that decision yet. But second point is, you may have picked up that South Cambridgeshire District Council has also considered a response in terms of its local impact report. It's important to understand that that's a slightly different report because inevitably the South Cambs District Council is concerned with the new structures and the new plant itself. In many respects, the City Council's kind of consideration relates to the impacts within its area, which fundamentally centre around the adjustments or the connectivity related issues, the construction and decommissioning issues associated with the project, and to stress it isn't, and in a way to thank the officers, because it isn't a shared planning service response. We've been engaging extensively with environmental health and your teams in the City Council on these related matters, environment and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Stephen, so questions, may I have raise of hands, please? So I'm just going to write the order. So Councillor Pounds, Councillor Bagent. Any other questions? Yeah. Councillor Bennett and Councillor Porritt. Okay, now would you like to take them by one or just a couple at a time?
Chair, I think it'd be helpful to have a couple at a time, and then we'll see how we go.
Okay, Councillor Pound.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, you just briefly touched on what I was going to ask Stephen, which is in the interest of good neighbourly behaviour with our colleagues in South Cambs. I just wanted to check that they were comfortable with that the plans had addressed any local concerns.
I think I'll just answer that, Chenge. Certainly, the local impact report for South Cambridgeshire identified a number of areas related to areas for clarification and further commentary in respect of the relevant matters for them. Collectively, as the report makes clear, the City Council, South Cambridgeshire District Council and the County Council are endeavouring to ensure that there is coherence between the comments that are being made. And indeed, at the examination process, we have a single barrister representing the public sector's position, the local authority's position in this space, precisely to make sure that the join-ups, particularly about things like transport and traffic routing, some of the issues are consistently covered, unless there are particular specific issues related to the individual authorities, and that's what the local impact report seeks to do. So there are similarities in elements of this report with the report that was presented to South Cambridgeshire. There are also differences reflecting the kind of parameters and the different impacts that will exist on the city and in South Cambs, but they are coherent, one hopes.
Thank you very much. Sounds like that's well under control. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Councillor Bajan, just a question.
Chair, yes, I've got 3 questions. 2 of them are quite simple. If I can ask the first 2, and that should be one-word answers almost. And the third one perhaps a little more complicated. We are giving in this paper delegated decision to Stephen Kelly to make decisions, all associated action necessary in the interest of the efficient and timely conduct of the council. I understand that. I'd like to see in there, though, but wherever possible, that he asks the executive councillor or consults with the executive councillor. I know he will do that, but I just like, because just so that we've got a seamless process, perhaps we could put that in there.
That would be our practice. One of the practical difficulties with binding that into your delegation to me is that in some circumstances we may well have a matter of a day or so in order to be able to respond, and I would want to try and make sure that in your name I was sufficiently authorised to respond in what may well be quite pertinent and important facts on behalf of the City Council, rather than it be pointed out that in some respects I can't do so unless I've been able to engage with the executive councillor.
I think wherever possible would be the sort of phraseology I'd like to see in there, if that's possible. I think that's quite simple. The second one is we are getting a grant of £227 million towards doing this work. What happens if it's not enough money? What happens if it does as things so often in these sort of situations, it goes over by 100 million? Who covers that shortfall? City Council responsible?
I can respond in part, but do you want to ask another question? Or? So the matter of the deliverability of the project is not something for the City Council as commentator in this space. Clearly, there is a joint venture partnership with Anglian Water, in which the deliverability of the project is the purpose behind that partnership arrangement. I'm not privy, I indicated earlier on, the separation between the functions of the council in this regard to the contractual arrangements between the two parties. It's fair to say that the examining authority have asked a series of associated questions around the deliverability of the project that the process will be testing as it goes forwards. But it's not a matter that I can comment on in terms of liabilities and so forth. Our job is to consider the impacts and the potential benefits if it takes place.
Chair, then would it be right for that question to remain on the table and for us to be given as a scrutiny committee an answer to that question?
I don't believe so. Am I right?
That issue is the responsibility of the Strategy and Resources Scrutiny Committee rather than this committee.
Okay, we within this, at page 61, we talk about meetings with Peter Freeman and his team. And we talk about Michael Gove's plan for expanding Cambridge. Just like to ask, as the first part of the question, how many meetings have we had with Peter Freeman and his team?
So there have been a number of conversations with the Department for Levelling Up, Homes England, the Cambridge Delivery Group through Peter Freeman and various spin-outs from that, including the Water Scarcity Group that he was announced alongside transport groups and so forth. I wouldn't want to give you an incorrect answer in terms of the number of those meetings here because they are engaging with people across the council and I don't have full sight to be able to answer that question at the moment. But I think certainly if you're indicating a desire to understand that the arrangements between the council and that project, then I think probably it's better to bring a further report to you on that because it's very much an active conversation at the moment.
Indeed, thank you very much for that. And I'd like to say that would be a good idea. I'd also like, within that report, to have a précis of the conversations that are actually taking place, what topics are being talked about, what position is the council taking on our behalf. I think that won't be an easy task, but it should come back to the Scrutiny Committee to be looked at.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bagent. But Stephen has made note of your last request. And now, Councillor Bennett, your question, please.
Thank you. I've got rather a lot. This is not the sort of everything the Green Party thinks about this project. I am concentrating on the local impacts. And the first thing I want to mention is the cover letter to the Executive Councillor refers to East Chesterton. But to be honest, I think it should really say all wards because it affects all of us. And my own ward, Abbey, is particularly impacted. So could we just change the cover? I know it's a small thing, but I think if we don't, it will be seized upon by people to say that we've not taken a broad view. The other thing is that it's very clear this is a very challenging time limit and process, and we didn't even get the 132-page list of questions from the inspector until officers had the report well underway. So I wonder if this report should be reviewed as the latest draft rather than the final version with any late amendments to go to spokes. Would you like me to stop there so we can answer as we go and then I'll continue with the others?
Let me take Stephen, what would you like?
I think I recognise the concern that is being highlighted, but my caution about how we move forward from here is more at the very real risk of being excluded from this process if we narrow the extent of the delegation. Our objective is obviously, and we've had this discussion at a previous scrutiny committee, to try and make sure that we can reflect your interests and the community's interest in this process. But the process is not one that we drive. And in some circumstances, we will have virtually no time to provide a response. Indeed, we will be expected to provide a response in the meeting. There is as you can see from the reports, there is an enormous amount of work and inquiries and questions involved in this process, such that my heart says it would be, we genuinely want to reflect your interests, but I fear that we may well exclude ourselves as a city council from this process if we put in place any sort of procedure that requires me to seek your input on what have you've already seen. I think there are 65 very extensive questions. That's just the beginning. There were 651 questions as part of that pack. We will get further questions from the examining authority, and in the interests of kind of the resources that you are currently deploying, which are already considerable, I don't think we can agree to a further extension of that resource in order to be able to, because we would need to significantly increase the size of the team to be able to respond. I'm sorry, you know, it's not, I'm not trying to be obstructive, but I'm concerned about our ability to participate in the process if my delegation is in some respects fettered in that way, because this is, as we know from previous or more recent DCOs, this is a highly litigious area, and the clarity of my ability to act on your behalf is an important part of that, in my view, if we are to avoid problems in further down the line. That doesn't mean that we might want to think about how we can brief this committee in terms of the programme, perhaps at each subsequent meeting that it has, to allow you to understand where that very intensive process has taken us to.
And Councillor Thornborough, you have something?
Yes, I just say that I'm really grateful to the officers for all they've done, and this is, I understand where Councillor Bennett is coming from, because a few years ago, when the first kind of major infrastructure consultations like this came to us, we were very cautious, and we were saying exactly the same. Can we not be briefed on everything as they go along? And we have made it clear that wherever possible, if there is time before a decision is made, that it comes to the Scrutiny committee, that it should happen that way. And if not, it would be written exchanges or email exchanges or something outside the meeting. But it goes from coming to scrutiny to, as Stephen said, actually making a decision in the meeting. It's not just this major infrastructure projects, it's many that are coming now. And I'm grateful that the Shared Planning Service is doing this for us, because I know other local authorities have delegated all of the decision making to the officers, but we remain involved as much as practical, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thornborough. Yes, Councillor Bennett, do you have any other questions? Apologies, Councillor
Would
Porro.
Councillor Porro come in on this point? Because I know what she has to say is quite closely related.
Okay.
It was just really, so I completely understand Stephen Kelly's reasoning. I don't want to fetter your discretion so we miss out on the time. But I suppose to me, I'm genuinely interested. I saw the questions this afternoon. They are substantial. Just reassure me that the inspector is clearly paying attention. There's a lot of them. But personally, as spokes, I would at least like us to be informed. You know, I appreciate if it's 2 days before, I probably wouldn't have time to come back to you, never mind, with full, but it's just to keep all of us in the loop, really, because this is a really important project. So I suppose I accept, the delegation as it is, and I welcome your reassurance, but I'd like it to be exec councillors and spokes, because I think these things are really useful. So not to say we have to sign it off, but just, for example, this big list of questions, I would really like to see what officers put together, some of which I know is already covered in here, because I think it's just important to make sure we're all informed, because we won't have time to come back to Scrutiny Committee. So it will always be kind of, in effect, out of cycle, not necessarily decisions, but at least information for us.
I mean, I'm certainly happy to share what we say in these issues and share the questions that we receive with Chair and Spokes. And I think but we're working with a barrister here. We're working with the counter, and in response to the further earlier question, we're trying to triangulate some of this work so that there's a coherence. But But, my assurance to you would be we will do our best to share with you all of those questions, allowing you to feed back to us any particular elements of those questions or what you would like us to do. And then, on your behalf, hopefully we will be able to do so in recognising the very tight timeline. So without fettering my delegation, my kind of commitment to you would be we definitely want you to feel free that you can comment on some of these matters. But my ability to be able to bind that into a process is a recommendation I would say, it may be difficult for us to do that, and I think it may well present issues for the authorities' ability to participate if we do.
Thank you, Stephen. Now, Councillor Burnett, did you have any other questions from before? I know that you said a few and you had a few more.
I'm afraid I do have a few more, Chair, but if people would feel that they'd like to jump in first. Okay. The next questions are all about the community impact, which is topic 8, which is number 13 and page 92 in the report. And it's also addressed on pages 44 to 54 of the Planning Inspectorate's report. And what I've done is I've looked at the community questions and tried to cross-reference them to the local impact report. And I've got a couple of points that I need to make. First one, questions 7.1, 7.14, 7.15 all refer to loss of boating access to River Cam during construction works. I've seen some chatter on social media and concerns that this might be a permanent loss, which I think are exaggerated. But I think it's useful for us to discuss that here and hopefully sort of resolve any anxiety we can. Unfortunately, this particular area of the river is used for tourist boats, private boats, and all year round by the city rather than university-based clubs. I think the current suggestion is that there should be a partial closure of the river between June and September. The inspectors asked for details of the scope of that partial closure and the timings and whether another period would be more appropriate, such as November to March. I think it's really important the balance of fairness between town clubs and university clubs is addressed because the impact is very different depending on the period used. But there's no 4-month period in which the stretch of the river is not used for races or for boating generally or for tourism. And although this question is addressed to the applicant and conservators, rowing is such an iconic Cambridge thing that I feel that we should reflect it in our own LIR. And I'm also concerned about the long-term impact on health for river users of siting the final effluent discharge, as that site appears to be very close to Batesmite Lock, which is traditionally the starting point for rowing races. But that's all the boating points. Shall I go on or do you want me to stop?
Yeah, keep going.
Okay, the next point in community is about the visitor centre, which is PIN's question 7.11 on page 46. The inspector has asked whether educational visits to schools could not be made instead. And I also wanted to flag another issue, which is there's already a section on water at sewage at the former water pumping station, now Cambridge Museum of Technology, and school visits provide much needed income and subsidise the provision of community meeting facilities by the museum to Abbey Ward. We have very few community meeting spaces and we really can't afford to lose another one. So that is a potentially significant detriment on our ward. The other community aspect I want to pick up is the recreational use of Honey Hill. Again, Pins asks a large number of questions about the present recreational use of a Honey Hill area. I won't give all the numbers, and the loss of public rights way. I haven't had time to do a ward consultation. I am aware that there's very extensive use of the green space, riverside walking routes and other country walking and cycling paths in those areas. They're included in several guidebooks, but I've not been able to undertake any survey of the extent of use in a timescale by Cambridge residents or even Abbey residents. Then would you like me to pause or go on to my next points?
Can I just ask Chenge to comment, because the issues of public rights of way, for example, the issue of the discharge back into the CAM are matters that are, as you've highlighted, I think what you're referring to, and not all members may well have this, is the planning inspectorate have published a series of questions, or the examining authority have published a series of questions for the applicants, not for the council, but for the applicants in relation to these elements, which the applicants are required to submit responses to. I think, Councillor Bennett, what you're highlighting is, from a city council perspective, your comments and observations around concerns in that arena, and the way that it impacts the city that you would want us to surface. Chenge, I know that we have already raised a number of those points, and in the responses from the county councillors, the Rights of Way Authority, those matters are being picked up. But Chenge, I don't know whether you can comment.
Yeah, that is correct. The rights over the River Cam have been highlighted to Cambridge County Council as the highway authority. That is their jurisdiction. We are working very closely with them in terms of highlighting issues that they would cover so that they are covered in their local impact report. So we have made mention of that discussion about the use of the River Cam, the rights over the River Cam, and the potential impacts associated with boating. We've also talked about public rights of way around Honey Hill. And the potential closures or diversions during construction. And because we're not the highway authority, what we've done in our local impact report is deferred to the county council in their jurisdiction, again, as the highway authority. But I am working closely with our counterparts there, and we have discussed that extensively. In terms of the point about the visitor centre, I think that's certainly something that is covered in terms of the applicant's submission. We haven't necessarily considered whether or not that would have an impact on the city of Cambridge. So that's certainly interesting for us to note. So thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Thank you very much, Chenge. And then Councillor Bennett, what I'll do, I'll go around to the other questions, and then if you still have questions, they have to be answered by the other councillors, and then I'll come back to you again. So Councillor Porritt, sorry.
Thank you very much, Chair. So firstly, thank you to Chenge and Claire. This is a really detailed report. Phenomenal amount of work's gone into it, I can see that. And I think generally I am agreeable with all the things that it puts forward. You know, this is our only strategic brownfield site left in the city. If it's not used, then we are looking at greenbelt expansion, as it says in 6.81, and transport is so important in terms of sustainability. And in terms of what this is commenting on, saying that this would give us the option of, 8,000 plus houses, and without the DCO and the move, everything there would be constrained by odour restrictions. I hadn't actually realised the extent of that until I read this. It's a large exclusion zone. So I definitely agree with your conclusions about the significant weight that should be given to the NEC in terms of this DCO. I agree as well about needing to include the GRT communities who live nearby. I thought that was a very important point in the communities one. And just generally how important this would be to allow us to create a district with a centre, with a community, you know, and that needs to be a site with a critical mass to do that. So I had a few questions. I think one we've addressed. I think Stephen kindly mentioned sending us questions. I'd quite like to see the answers as well as the questions. I appreciate that we wouldn't necessarily have time to comment, but, you know, if we did, it would be nice to put our input. We understand as spokes we can still be overruled anyway, but I hope that would be possible, that whenever possible we get sent stuff, and we will do our best to comment. The main, hopefully minor concerns I have is that looking at the indicative master plan for NEC, I want to know where the vent stack is. And I also feel that the exec councillor and Stephen Kelly I want to make sure before we send this in that we're completely clear about any exclusion zone around the proposed vent stack that will remain on site, or an easement zone, so, you know, where perhaps we couldn't build. Because obviously, my understanding is it will probably just be a small sticking up tube that just allows things to vent, a bit like the ones we have, I think, on Midsummer Common. But at the moment, I gather from officers at our briefing yesterday, we haven't got that information. So I would urge Councillor Thornberg and Stephen to make absolutely certain we're sure that isn't going to be sticking up right in the middle of where our indicative master plan is showing lots of lovely houses, and make sure that Anglian Water do confirm if there is any kind of odour zone around it. I'm hoping not, but for me that was kind of the point that came out, and I think officers have drawn that out in the report. Equally, it's meant to be a 10-metre chimney. I think our indicative building heights are considerably higher on some of that site. So again, I would urge Stephen, if it's possible, and Chenge to make sure that we're satisfied that if, for example, we need that stack to be higher, to make sure that it's venting high enough that that will still work. And it's probably a small point, because I hope this is a very minor thing, but I was just mindful that as yet, and I think as Chenge and Claire pointed out, we don't actually have an exact location. And again, the same applies to the decommissioning. You know, there will be, I understand legally that the land is decommissioned, then it's handed over, and then the new person, who ironically I think is the same landowner, would then mitigate and make good. But again, I just want to make sure we are comfortable that decommissioning isn't leaving anything that might restrict our ability to provide the housing and the mixed uses that we're hoping to do on the site. So I don't know if Stephen or Cheng, you might be able to comment on that now. So I'm just mindful we don't have the map of that vent yet, and the dosing facility that's apparently next to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I think they're good points. You know, we have flagged them up. Our colleagues in the environmental health team have also highlighted it. I think if there's some assurance, is firstly that there is some continuity in terms of the development. The developers' interests in this case are directly aligned in terms of values to resolving those issues. In other words, if they can't resolve them satisfactorily, they will take less value from that site. But even if they were to be separated out, and in some way, shape or form, the current applicants for the DCO were not developing, I'm confident that the environmental health team and ourselves are very cognizant of that. And clearly our ambitions, your ambitions set out in the AAP, is for this to be a healthy community, to be a community of reasonable densities, but one in which those types of impediments to good housing and a good placemaking are not harmful. I think we're confident that they can be resolved, but in many respects, the final shape and form of the North East Cambridge site will depend upon a whole series of considerations, you know, potentially in 10 or 15 years' time, that we will need to work with and evolve. And as a planning committee, of course, the location of that stack and its impact on residents will be a material planning consideration for you sitting in another capacity as a City Council planning committee when the time comes to consider the proposals.
Thank you, Stephen. Now, Councillor Dickovic and then Councillor Swift.
So considering water supply is very uncertain generally within the report, and it's difficult to predict, is it the water resources management plan that is expected to conclude at the end of 2023, is that going to provide greater clarity in terms of supply, and will it have an impact or implication on the DCO examination process?
Thank you. Unless my colleagues want to answer that, I'll perhaps start. And sorry, the screen's in my way. I'm not trying to see. The Water Resource Management Plan is I'm assuming that your question is targeted at the subsequent development of North East Cambridge, or is it targeted at the water treatment works itself?
Generally, in terms of obviously building so many properties is going to involve a lot of water supply. So I'm just curious as to what document is going to really give us any kind of guidance as to whether the development is likely to succeed as planned.
Okay, so yes, it is. It's not just the Water Resource Management Plan; it's the Ofwat business plan for Cambridge Water, and or the approved business plan, investment plan for Cambridge Water, and so on. Clearly, this project, in terms of the sequencing required to remove the water treatment works, firstly, in the event that the development consent order is successful, Claire highlighted the timelines, and it's helpful to bear those in mind. So the process in terms of the realisation of a benefit, which I think is what you're alluding to, which is the ability of the DCO to release the North East Cambridge site for further development. The sequence will be in the event that the DCO is accepted, there is then a period of construction of the new water treatment works, and then there will then be a period of testing and decommissioning of the existing water treatment works before a single home can be, or a single user in many respects on that piece of land can be realised, recognising that there are some areas already that can come forward ahead of it. What it points to, however, is that the delivery of the large majority of the development on North East Cambridge will only begin towards the end of this decade. And there is a build-up rate at which that then takes place. The discussion that's taking place around the Water Resource Management Plan at the moment is whether or not the conservation measures that Cambridge Water are promoting through their Water Resource Management Plan have sufficient impact and bite to allow for that additional demand to come forward in future years. And that's a judgment that DEFRA and the Environment Agency, looking at the modelling that underpins the Water Resource Management Plan, are engaged with at this moment in time. So from what we do know is that the physical measures, particularly the bulk water transfer project and then potentially a new reservoir in the Fens, which come back to the consenting, in a sense, the approval through the business plan process for Cambridge Water to be able to invest in for the 2030s, we will, that position is likely to be settled before, in fact, the DCO concludes, with Ofwat either agreeing to that level of investment, and then there's a regulatory regime for those various works to happen, at a point that predates a decision that the examining authority will need to take. So, distilling it down, is the water issue likely to be resolved, I think, your question, and the concerns about water in relation to the benefit that is being delivered through this site? The process would say, and the different regulatory regimes would imply that yes. We haven't yet seen that process, but it's not one of our processes. It's not a planning process. It's a water resources planning process, which is separate. But in terms of confidence levels about the delivery of the benefit from new homes and jobs, one makes an assumption that the capacity will be provided in due course. The development of, what we're saying is that the development of this site, given your objectives around climate change and so on, would be one of the most appropriate places to bring forward future homes and jobs in Greater Cambridge, and you can therefore, subject to that water matter being resolved, than any other place, and therefore there is a significant value to that happening because of all of the associated carbon footprint reductions that come from locating development proximate to existing amenities in a city, as opposed to looking at more dispersed locations where transport and other things impact more significantly your climate and net zero ambition.
Thank you, Stephen. And then Councillor Swift, you also had a question?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think there is quite a lot of, a lot of people are concerned that infrastructure needs to be worked out first, particularly with the chalk stream drying up. And it's a shame that the Fen reservoir can't be started before the mid-30s when there's all of these thousands of houses being planned. I note on page 50, it says 6.73, given the uncertainty over water supply and also evidence indicating that it may or may not be possible to deliver the increased needs in full, it is not possible at this point to set a definitive housing target for the new local plan. So I think there's quite a sort of perception that we've got to get the infrastructure and water supplies worked out before any of this becomes anything but academic. But two questions I've got. One is on the impact of construction transport infrastructure for the North East Cambridge development, and how it will impact Cambridge City Council, and a request to try and have a railway delivery option so that instead of more lorries coming down Milton Road or wherever, actually the new Cambridge North Station can be utilised better in providing the infrastructure changes that will be required when the relocation takes place, assuming it does. And the other thing I'm concerned about, there's pages and pages in this report about odour problems, and there's a lot of scepticism with Anglian water and Cambridge water. What sort of, if the odour does impact excessively on Abbey and King's Hedges, for example, is there any mechanism, is there any ombudsman that actually has some teeth to do something about it, or will the water company just get away with it? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Swift. I don't know whether Chenge or Caroline want to comment in terms of the wider North East Cambridge development strategy. I suppose just a qualification, we need to consider the DCO application as it is, which is for a certain stage of development in terms of decontamination and so on this site. And I think your questions probably go to the next level, asking about the construction phase of North East Cambridge. Which I don't think has been fully resolved, but equally is not is a matter that the environmental statement and the construction programme and so forth for that is probably better placed to cover in due course. But I think in terms of your point about odour, Chenge, I wonder whether it's possible just to comment on the kind of residual odour questions that we have asked through the LIR, which is an area that we would expect further information to come forward on.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. We would require an odour management plan to be submitted as a DCO requirement, and that odour management plan would have parameters in place to ensure that it does have teeth. So if, for example, the odour limits are exceeded in a certain location, then there's got to be mitigation put in place to ensure that those matters are resolved. So that would be something that would be considered as part of the requirement process of the DCO, and our environmental health officers are satisfied with that methodology and the approach that the applicant has put forward thus far.
Thank you very much, Chenge. And then I'm just going to go for another round for further questions. Any other questions? Okay, so all right, we'll go Councillor Bennett and Councillor Pounds.
I'll have quite a lot, so I will do the shortest one and then perhaps throw over to Councillor Pounds. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank Chengdi. It was very obvious at our pre-scrutiny meeting that she is really the master of her subject and has done huge amounts of work, as in fact the whole team has. And I note her comments on the local impact reports from the associated councils, hopefully commenting on some of the matters I've raised. But the point is that I'm here as a scrutiny councillor, and the only one of those local impact reports I get to look at is this one. So it's really my responsibility to ensure that those matters are reflected in that report if they are of concern to Cambridge residents and have an impact on the city. And in connection with that, I do want to flag some transport issues, because this has been the issue raised most by my ward, which is that the relocation of the wastewater treatment plant will put further stress on two traffic pinch points, which are the two A14 junctions used for access to and from the east of the city. It's already an area of heavy congestion and a double accident black spot. And I cannot see that moving the treatment works to Honey Hill is going to do anything other than increase it, whichever of the options taken. So at this point, shall I hand over to Councillor Pounds?
Could I just comment on that on that point, because I think one of the issues that understanding the point that you've made, Councillor Bennett, I think one of the issues that we have struggled with is the evidence that underpins that statement, because there has been some transport modelling, I think, that's being undertaken, which the county are commenting on, which suggests that there is a bit of a trade-off here, because traffic is going to be removed from the Milton junction. And you're absolutely right in terms of reassignment of some of that sludge traffic and daily traffic onto junctions to the east. But the transport assessment work, as far as we understand, I might check with Chengay, implies that the proportionality of that, even allowing for heavy vehicles, that are commercial vehicles that are likely to form a greater predominance of that traffic use, is relatively, is indeed very modest when considering the overall trips on those various links at this moment in time. So that the evidence of harm, which I think you're alluding to in terms of, isn't something that the Highway Authority feel is justifiable as a kind of objection or an impact because of the modest nature of it. But Chengay can maybe comment further on the work that's being done around that point.
Certainly. So the County Council would actually have the expertise to review the traffic modelling data that has been submitted with the DCO application. And in the discussions that we've had with the County Council, Stephen is quite correct. They considered that the traffic impact, the construction traffic impact associated with this development is not to a scale that would be considered significant. However, they are still considering mitigation measures such as reducing peak hour traffic movements and also trying to make sure that the incidence of potential diversions, particularly at key junctions, is minimized. So we are, again, in close communication with the County Council on those matters, but principally their role is to really review the applicant's modelling data carefully, and from what we understand, they're satisfied that they have looked at it, and it is not a significant impact.
Thank you, Chenge. And then Councillor Pounds.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make an observation, really, and thank the officers for what is a really comprehensive and thorough report. Thank you very much. And it's very reassuring to know that so much work and so much consideration is going on to look at all the problems that might possibly arise from what is really quite a complex and complicated thing to do. I just noted that in the report on page 40, your mention about the North East Cambridge housing development is only a paragraph. And I just thought, well, I don't want us to forget what a fantastic opportunity this is and what a really, really good housing development is promised at the end of all this, and that makes all this worthwhile. And really high quality housing for Cambridge. And the thing that particularly impressed me was the benefits for the communities around there, but also the focus on climate change and active travel, making that very easy, and public transport, which means that this development, as well as providing all these houses, will have a smaller possible impact on the congestion and the pollution in Cambridge, which is for us all a real serious worry. So, thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Councillor Pound. Yes, Councillor Lee.
I actually kind of just wanted to echo these sentiments. I'm from Cambridge, and so many of the people that I know had to move away from Cambridge. So many people that I work with had to move out of Cambridge to get onto the property ladder. So I think it's a huge opportunity to build houses, build it in a sustainable way, a way that promotes active travel, walking, and is integrated into local public transport networks, both with Cambridge North Station, the busway, and buses in general. And I think that's particularly important given the collapse of the sustainable travel zone plans that we were recently discussing. It does sound a bit too good to be true, but I think we should, welcome this and have the courage to make sure that all the benefits in this report are actually carried out. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chair. Just to echo Councillor Pounds and Councillor Lee there as well. Coming back to my points about the vents and the chemical dosing, I was just wondering if Chenge or Stephen, I'm looking at paragraph 8.21, which is the conclusions on the noise, and paragraph 9.24, which is the conclusions on odour. I just wonder in both of those if we could perhaps, if officers and the Exec Council could just consider maybe adding a little more in. So picking up from the previous paragraphs, just saying we definitely want more information about the noise from the vent and the dosing plant in 8.21, and in 9.24, picking up the points you make in 9.19, so there's a lot of paragraphs here, Stephen, about the easement or cordon sanitaire, just so it's absolutely clear that our support is obviously wanting that information, just because I felt that will be important. Hopefully it's not a problem, but I'd rather we find out sooner rather than later exactly what that would entail. So I don't know if that's something the Exec Council and Stephen and Chenge might consider. Thank you.
I think certainly we can take on board those comments in how we finesse the relevant paragraphs you've highlighted.
Thank you. Now, given the importance of the topic, I'm just going to do one last round, and then just please limit yourself to like 3 minutes at the most about questions. So, yes, Councillor Bennett.
Apologies for trying out for his patience, but this is obviously an area of great concern to all of us. I'd also like to thank Councillor Djokovic for mentioning the water scarcity issues, because that also touches on an issue that I want to raise, which is that the proposal is to move the sewage treatment plant from an area of clay soil to an area of chalk. And I make no claim to be an engineer, but I understand that this increases the risk of seepage for chalk stream because it's a more porous soil. And in an area, of acute water shortage, where drinking water is entirely sourced from underground chalk streams, I feel this should be a concern to us all. And if there are any other questions that can be put to the applicant, and any precautions that can be put in place, I think we'd like to see them. I'd also like to point out that we do have some really serious water scarcity issues I was sadly the only councillor at the public Cambridge water management meeting last night to hear about the latest progress, and it's still a huge gamble. We're gambling people's future, water future, on some very challenging sort of interventions, particularly for Grafham water transfer. And we're already on the second version of the plan, with the regulatory authorities rejecting the first one. There is every possibility that we could relocate the green belt, relocate the wastewater plant to green belt, reduce the amount of green belt, reduce the amount of arable land, which contributes to our food security, and then waste 227 million of public money and be unable to build the promised housing because we can't supply the water. And I think that we should be realistic about that risk and ensure that we are doing everything we can to minimise it. Thank you.
Stephen, would you like to reply to any of the comments?
I think that point's well understood. As you'll appreciate, Councillor Bennett, me and my team are doing a huge amount of work with a wide range of stakeholders on exactly that issue to try and really understand the solutions and the levels of risk and so forth, and the Environment Agency have increasingly engaged in that. I think what we do know, though, is at this moment in time, recognising that there are short-term challenges, the modelling work that we do have, even allowing for the environmental destinations that are so important to the long-term sustainability of the chalk streams, is that certainly based upon the modelling of growth levels, that subject to, and I recognise it's a subject to, but subject to those physical infrastructure measures to supplement groundwater with alternative water supplies, that the strategy that we're putting forward to you in due course means that this type of scale of development and this type of location are deliverable from a water supply perspective, albeit the question, and I absolutely recognise this is still work ongoing with the Environment Agency, is how quickly that additional demand can be allowed to come forward given the environmental destinations being set for safeguarding the risk of chalk streams. And that's a very live conversation and it's work in progress. I think the benefit of this, of the release of the site, which is the kind of thread that I think we need to follow for this DCO and LIR report, is nevertheless one that we are confident is a benefit, even allowing for those questions related to time and delivery.
Thank you, Stephen. And then should we now move to vote? Where is Councillor Swift? I think he. Where am I? All right. Okay. So all those in favor, please raise your hands. And then so the second, and then any abstentions? And against? Okay. And does the Executive Council agree with the recommendation?
Yes, I do. And thanks again to the shared planning service who continue to put in so much time to deal with this on our behalf. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, Chenge, Claire, and Caroline. Thank you very much. Thank you, Stephen. So now we'll turn to agenda item 13 on page 27, which is response to government consultation permitted development rights. Now, as the decision has been made, I will ask the members note the report. Does any of the members have any comments? Oh, yes. Okay, Councillor Bennett, it's page 27. Yeah. Okay, I have apologies. Yes, it was here.
That's my mistake, sorry.
All right. Yes, just a typo on the page here. Okay, so as I said, any comments from the committee, and as this should be brief, as the decision has already been made. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yes.
I would just like to thank the opposition party because even when the decisions are made outside of this committee, the papers are sent to them, and they're very good at going through and actually getting comments back to us. So I appreciate that, and thank you. And obviously the committee members here are aware of what's going on and do rediscuss it. So that your feedback promptly is really appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thornborough. Now, does the committee note these items? Sorry, Councillor Pounds, yes. Okay, you noted, sorry, yeah, so you had it. Okay, thank you. Now, everybody, thank you very much. Now, this concludes the Planning and Transport Scrutiny Committee. And just to note, the next meeting will be the 16th of January, 2024. Thank you.